Welcome along to Under Construction with Chadwicks. I'm Donncha Callan and I'm delighted to be joined by our host, Pat Moore. Pat, how are we getting on?
Go Donncha yourself.
Jeez, Pat, you went all out. You got a jacket.
Look, I said, I'll try and show you up instead of the other way around.
You absolutely have.
Then you go and get a brand new shirt and there. So
where'd you get this? You look like Boyzone or Westlife.
It's workwear.
Yeah,
the construction sector.
Yeah.
It's new workwear for the office worker.
I hope it's sustainable because that's the big topic today, Pat. We're going to look into sustainability, a massive topic in every industry, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and particularly in construction in the last number of years, as our guest no doubt will touch on, it's really relevant in relation to saving people money, first of all, but also it's better for the environment. And in particular, if you look from a construction perspective, the materials that we're bringing in versus what we brought in many years ago have changed substantially. So yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it, and we're going to dive straight in. We're delighted to be joined by David Shiel, who has an incredible bit of software called YourRetrofit.ie. David, how are you?
Great, thanks. I'm good.
You might tell us a little bit about YourRetrofit.ie.
Yeah, sure. So it's a web-based platform that we've built making use of the National BER database, where we're trying to demystify the process for homeowners about how they can go about a retrofit. There's a lot of interest in it, and there's obviously a number of obstacles. The first one, through our research, being an ability to understand where to start and what to do. So YourRetrofit.ie is a tool where you can understand, based on the very specific characteristics of your home captured through your BER rating, what upgrades might be available. And then we're also, one of the key things we want to try and do is introduce you to the ecosystem of where you can avail of savings and the network that can help you to undertake the retrofit.
Super. It's so important when we look at sustainability. And to help us get a worldview of it, we are thrilled to be joined by author, builder, teacher, TV presenter, Harrison Gardner. And Harrison, not even on that, there's more to it. You are a co-CEO and a co-founder of Common Knowledge. Is that right? Can you tell us a bit about that?
That's right, Donncha. Yeah. Thanks for having us. Common Knowledge is a social enterprise based out in the Burren, where we teach people, skills for a more sustainable life. A big part of that is construction and being able to build and fix and mend things around your house so you don't have to get other people to do it if you can't afford to, or if you can't find someone, which is often the case. But also just upskilling people to be able to start solving some of their own problems. You know, we've become so specialized in our own specific industry that it's really enabling and empowering for people to learn something as simple as hanging a shelf in their house.
Yeah.
You know, and we've lost that. And I think we've lost that pretty recently. Most of our parents knew how to hang a shelf. Most of our grandparents knew how to hang a door. And we're getting further and further away from some really basic skills. So that's what we're trying to do at Common Knowledge. We're trying to give people access to the information so they can decide whether this is something they want to learn how to do or keep getting someone else to do for them.
Harrison, that's so interesting, because I just think one generation on, Jenny's dad basically is the go-to if anything comes down in our house or needs looking after. I suppose I wouldn't have that common knowledge, the common sense to probably get after it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's too much ammunition coming here. You just mentioned common knowledge, common sense.
That's why you said it to Harrison and not you.
They both go hand in hand. Really what we're saying is you do not do anything.
I do nothing.
Tell Jenny you don't have to touch anything in the house until her dad comes over and oversees the whole thing.
Harrison, I'm not the only one. I'd say you're seeing a lot of it.
You see it everywhere, and it's not just a generational thing, it's a gender thing, it's a sexuality thing. We have this idea of what a builder looks like. And to be honest, it's wrong. We shouldn't have a demographic that is a builder. Builders shouldn't all look like me or like you. You know, builders can look like anything. Builders can be any age, any gender, any sexuality, and there's nothing that makes someone or gives someone the ability to create shelter for themselves or create a home for themselves. And that's what we take away from people when we say, sorry, girls aren't meant to be building houses or welding or hanging doors. That's a job for the lads. And that's a problem, because we're actually taking away people's security of shelter, their ability to create home for themselves.
Of course.
And not everyone wants to do it. And I'm not saying everyone should do it.
No.
But we need to give everyone the opportunity to try and do that.
In our sector, even to be fair, we had Kay Fahy on the show a while ago. She's a crane driver in Galway.
Amazing.
And the sector itself needs to have more diversity in relation to, we don't have enough tradespeople, and we're trying to attract, as we said in the last couple of episodes, attract more younger people into the sector. So, I mean, from your perspective, can you give us kind of an insight of like what got you into this end of it? And I mean, if you come from Australia, what was the journey from there to here?
Yeah, for sure. So I started in very conventional construction in Australia. There it was mostly timber framing and red brick building. And I traveled as soon as I left school. I had started an apprenticeship, didn't finish it because I wanted to hit the road. I only thought I was going away for 2 months. And I didn't really go back for 10 years. Wow. I went from country to country. I kept building. And at first I thought I was going and teaching people how to build in developing countries like Kenya and India. And then when I got there, I realized that they were actually teaching me all these amazing, innovative, creative ways to build homes out of whatever you had access to. So building products weren't things that you went and got at the store. They were whatever you found, whether that was mud or stone or car tires or blocks or garbage. It didn't matter. And what I learned very quickly was basically how to build a building out of whatever you could find. And then I started this journey of going from country to country, learning whatever building techniques I could, anything that was out there that I hadn't done before. So I was doing traditional timber framing, I was building mud houses, I was building straw bale houses, and I did a lot of conventional construction in between because that was always the easy way to make money in between all these crazy other things that I was doing where there's no money to be made at all. And then I was between jobs. I ended up working for a company called Earthship Biotecture in the States who build houses out of garbage, out of used car tires, glass bottles, aluminium cans, a lot of earth, and then a lot of conventional glass. And they're totally off-grid buildings, and they're amazing, but they're not for everywhere. They're not for every place on the planet. And I had finished a job for them in Iceland. I was going to my next job in Malawi, and Ireland kind of felt like it was on the way. It was in between the two.
Okay.
And I had 6 months to spare.
Yeah.
So I ended up in Dublin, and I ended up at the Fumbally Cafe in Dublin. And they had just bought a big building next door, big empty stone building. And I offered to build it out for free for them in exchange for food and board.
Wow.
And so that was my first introduction to Ireland. And then I ended up buying an old cottage out in Clare, which was, thanks to me actually looking on Your Retrofit this morning, built in 1900. And I was so excited. Coming from Australia, where we don't have any old stone buildings, I got to buy a building that was over 100 years old, that someone 100 years ago had put this energy and effort and work into creating. And in my mind it was something to be treasured. It was a building that's lasted 100 years and was pretty much in the exact same condition as when it was first built. And so it was a new opportunity for me to learn how to build with stone and how to work with these older techniques, but incorporate all the new things that we've got now, all the new technologies that we've got, and bring them into that stone building too. And so that's been my project for the past 7 years, is working on that house, which started as a bachelor pad. And then my wife moved in and she started making it a bit nicer. And then we had 2 daughters. And now it's like very much my family home, and we keep having to add rooms on as the kids keep landing.
Yeah. Always important and great to have. David, you might tell us about your own journey to the point of YourRetrofit.ie, just your own background and how you got to that great spot.
Yeah, my background, I guess, is very different from building, as we've discussed many times with Chadwick's. I would have worked in the central bank in banking supervision regulation originally out of college, and very much in the analytics space. I would have done a master's in quantitative finance, and then I worked in consulting in Grant Thornton for a couple of years, and then more recently in AIB in the analytics area there. So my background has been very much analytics, tech, data. And then I started up the company in July 2021 with a view to providing analytics consulting services in the first instance, but also to try and build analytics products.
Yeah.
So we started to hire a team around the analytics consulting business. We grew to kind of 7 or 8 in kind of 5 or 6 months, and we were providing consulting to banks, fintechs, insurance companies and likes. But then we started to focus on where we could get products. And the idea with the products is, how can we bring technology or analytics to from what we've learned in finance predominantly into the product space? Because there's obviously a lot more focus on it in the last decade or so. And we would have seen opportunity. We just didn't know where it was.
Yeah,
so
okay.
We had to start the business somewhere, which was the consulting. But then sustainability was an area we immediately honed in on and said, can we bring analytics and technology to the sustainability space? So what we did one day is we got the government's climate action plan out, and we started reading through the chapters. And we said, okay, What are they trying to do? We know there's obviously kind of European legislation driving what they're trying to do. And the two areas we focused in on immediately were electric vehicles and the home retrofit space. The home retrofit, because I would have totally underestimated how many homes in the country had a BER rating. I would have thought, I don't know, 20% or something like that, or even less. It turns out it's almost 50%.
Okay.
And then the other thing that we didn't realize, and actually probably one of the breakthrough moments, was at the Ideal Home Show, talking to a great BER assessment company, actually energy consulting company, about what's involved in a BER assessment and understanding the level of granularity that goes into it. And I remember for me, when they told me that whether you have a lagging jacket or not and your hot water cylinder is captured, I couldn't believe that was captured.
Yeah.
So then we realized, okay, there's hundreds of data points in each BER. So the idea was, we've got 2.1 million homes in the country, 900,000 BER assessments, and hundreds of data points, up to 500-600 data points in each BER. So we've got a database of hundreds of millions worth of data points around the housing stock in the country, and a big ambition around retrofit and get to B2. So surely there's an avenue for using analytics and data technology with all of that data to bring us there. So that was where the idea came from. And then we got in touch with the SEI about, what is being done with the data set, and is there interest in companies utilizing it for the aim of trying to help the National Retrofit Plan.
David, it's so interesting because analytics can lead to behavioural change. I noticed in rugby, when we started measuring certain things for performance, it changes behaviour. And sustainability is probably the perfect area that we probably need to change in. And having that knowledge of analytics and making correct decisions has never been so important.
Yeah, I think it's a really good comparison, because even since we've gotten the access to the database, we've been able to spot an awful lot of anomalies in how a building is measured. We've been able to talk to the SEI about this. Obviously, there's a lot of judgment into assessing the energy performance of a building. There's been a lot of enhancements and requirements have changed through time, but analytics is a perfect route to trying to identify that and to try and drive consistent. One of the things we want to do with YourRetrofit.ie is bring some transparency and consistency to the marketplace, where consumers, quite often are putting their faith in one builder or one quantity surveyor over the work that they should get done to the house. So the analytics definitely, as you say, Donncha, gives the opportunity to try and identify areas of improvement in a consistent manner.
Harrison, you're probably seeing the other side of that, though, you know what I mean, on the ground, and how important it is for living standards. Just things like we mentioned, the BER rating and stuff like that, just being able to measure now in all types of builds.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so exciting about this software that you've created is that it's empowering people. It's giving people the knowledge to actually make their decisions themselves, rather than just having one person's advice who may or may not be having a good day when they're telling you what you need to do to your house. We're all just people in the end. And I think there's huge value in anything that we're doing where we're actually trusting people to try and create better homes for ourselves. I think that needs to be our baseline when we are thinking of these people as homeowners, that they're not just buildings or shelters, but these are people's homes. And it's so much more than just keeping them warm. It's a place that they can feel safe. It's a place they can be creative. It's a place they're going to bring up their kids. They're really emotionally invested in these places as well. And improving them, they're financially invested in them as well, emotionally and financially. And improving them is being fed by all those different factors. It's not just I should have a more efficient house because it's better for the planet. For some people, that's a really important factor, but there's so many other things at play when we talk about our home. And I think anything that's giving people the knowledge that they need and the information that they need to then make good, informed decisions is really powerful and really good for the people. So
when we look at it, lads, just for major issues, supply chain, can we chat a little bit about that? And David, I might go to you first on it, and just the difficulty in that, in the amount of CO2 emissions when we look further afield.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, one of the very first things when we were doing our research in this area is, if we want to get into the space, is you hear it so often about the constraints on supply of tradespeople who are qualified to do the work. Now, I think there's a couple of thoughts I have on that, which is absolutely it is constraining. We need to train up more people to be in the industry, and the government is looking at that, and they've certainly earmarked that in the Climate Action Plan. It's definitely needed. But one of the thoughts we've had with the analytics side is you can bring efficiencies to that even before that. So we know, and as you say, the emissions of even going from job to job and scoping out the potential job and trying to make a sale as a tradesperson to an individual homeowner, that consumes a lot of their own time, but also, as you say, has a carbon footprint left behind. What we can do now with the technology is the construction industry can see through the lens of the BER rating an awful lot of information about the house through our software before they ever go and visit. So they have a really good idea of whether the job is suitable to them and their own supply services, but also if the homeowner will have an idea around cost. So we're going to be able to give them a good sense. So you kind of bridge the gap a little bit where maybe the tradesperson visits the house and said, I can't do this.
Yeah, okay.
Or maybe the homeowner has the tradesperson visit and say, I can't afford this. And now if we can bring the analytics where they can avoid the need in the first instance to get that kind of barometer set, that can certainly help with that. And I think even with Chadwick's, there's a great service, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, that we're going to provide with them. But Patrick would have said it himself when we were meeting in the early days, is we have the ability here to kind of create platinum leads, as he calls it, for the contractors, so that you can identify the homes that are most suited to the type of work you do, where you can have the greatest impact. And again, reduce wasted visits from their perspective where they're not generating sales.
Harrison, sounds so interesting, you know, for you as a foot soldier being down at the end of that and to be able to actually go, no, well, this isn't a right fit for me, or this is the perfect job because it ties in with everything I can be sustainable with.
Yeah, I think that whole system kind of, it works in that it's connecting the right contractors with the right clients that are going to lead to jobs actually getting done, which is really, really important. And then I think where I find myself mostly is because I've got this reputation for building out of all kinds of weird and wonderful things and helping people with their own projects, is that all the people who get missed in that catching process, all the people that the tradesmen are like, actually, that one doesn't make sense for me because they can't afford to have me come and do the work, you know, because there's going to be a lot of people who get missed in that process. They need an option as well. They need to find a way to be able to create their own spaces and make their homes warmer and make them more energy efficient and cheaper to run. And, you know, the supply chain thing is really interesting. And I spend a lot of time experimenting and working with different materials. And along with a lot of other people in Ireland, have been looking at sheep's wool a lot as a material. And why aren't we insulating our houses with it here? Why aren't we using it? Why is it rotting in fields? We're not even knitting our own jumpers with it anymore. It's all going to waste. And I spent a lot of last year with my arms deep in buckets of wet sheep's wool, rinsing out lanolin.
Whatever you're into, fella.
Processing all of that. And
sounds like a perfect Saturday night.
Yeah.
But there are ways to use it. You know, there are ways to use these materials that we are producing, and sometimes they're not going to be the most cost-effective solution. But we're reaching a point where that can't be the only factor anymore. That can't be the only decision-making factor anymore about whether it's the cheapest option to produce something locally, because there's so many other things at play. And when we consider the carbon footprint of something's journey to get to us, we can't ignore the sheep's wool that's rotting in the field next to us when we're buying our alternative products. And so I think on a whole, we really need to put the pressure on ourselves to challenge that and use what we're surrounded by.
Yeah. It's like most, it's really the balance. It's finding that balance between the cost of the product and also then the sustainability piece of the product. You're quite right in relation to the sheep's wool. We have sheep's wool in Chadwick's. I just got that in there plugging in, but we have sheep's wool in 100%. But there is, when you look at the cost piece versus the traditional insulation, there is an issue around that. And then, like, most people want to do the right thing. Then when it comes to budgets, and you'll know, even recently we had an episode in relation to self-build. There is a cost element and a budget element to that, which leads me, David, to a question to you, really. So how do people go about getting started in relation to YourRetrofit.ie, and then also what challenges do you see the homeowner having at the moment?
Yeah, so to get started with us, so very much is pretty straightforward on YourRetrofit.ie. You come on, and essentially there's kind of two routes to begin with. If you're a homeowner, you either have a BER or you don't have a BER on the property, and we cater for both. So if you don't have a BER, our backgrounds are all in analytics and model development. And so we've built a predictive model to estimate your BER on the back of a couple of questions that you answer for us. And then if you do have a BER, we can access the BER file on your behalf once you give us your consent through a copy of your energy bill. And then we can tell you very specifically about your house, where it is deficient. And we give you full capability to decide what's your budget? Tell us your budget. We can give you the recommendations of, okay, your best bang for buck given your budget is the following, and that would lead to, say, attic insulation and wall insulation, and that'll take you from, say, a D1 to a B3 or whatever it might be. We run the exact calculations according to the BER methodology in line with the actually using the SEI system to do that. So it's exactly as a BER assessor would do it. And then we give you the option to choose kind of a basic, quick and simple package, as we call it. If you want to just do something that's non-invasive and cost-effective, you can choose that package. If you want to go the whole hog and get solar and what we call the comprehensive package, you can do that too. And we've tried to distill it into those packages so that the customer doesn't have to go in and drop in insulation, change the doors and that kind of thing. But you have that full capability if you would like to. The very same for the house that doesn't have a BER assessment. We've got that predictive model, and we say, based on the variety of questions we've asked you, we expect your house to be the following, to give you a bit of a sense. Obviously, we'll recommend you go and get a BER at that point. And then we've a really cool initiative with Chadwick's whereby, say you're a homeowner, in either instance, you can book an appointment with Chadwick's to go and visit your local store. And Chadwick's has spent an awful lot of time training up the staff on the NZEB requirements and BER requirements. So they will give you an in-person consultation based on the specifics of your house, of what the options might be, and who the contractors that might be able to do that work for you would be.
So there's a whole piece around the education part of it. So in relation to schools and stuff, have you involved in anything in relation to the younger people coming through? As again, we mentioned before, we're desperate to get people back into the sector. You know, everybody wants their child to go to college. The trades, you know, the construction sector itself is struggling for labour. You know, how do you see how do you see us tackling this problem in relation to people like Donegal's never going to be able to hang a door, but his daughters might be able to hang a door in a couple of years. So how do we get them to that level?
Yeah, so Common Knowledge has just moved on to this new 50 acres in the borough, and we had our first school group through yesterday. We had kids from Inisheer come over who are doing their year in the Gaeltacht, and they've come over and they are building a small structure on the island as their end of year project, and they came over to learn how to work together as a team and how to co-design together. And so what I actually did was I ran a workshop with them, which we usually run with couples who are, you know, everyone's in love and they're moving in together and they go to build a house together, and it's the hardest thing they've ever had to do as a couple, and it puts all these stresses on them. And so I actually ran this program for them as a group, as 16 kids who have to not only create the space that they want, but create a space that works for everyone and meets everyone's needs. And they got to meet our whole construction team. You know, we've got female builders on the team. We've got people who come from a furniture and design background. We've got people from conventional construction, all on the team. And they get exposed to these people who are coming at this same thing of home building and shelter making from all these different walks of life, and getting exposed to all the many ways that you can do it. Because there isn't just a one size fits all to housing. We've got to come up with a unique approach to everyone's unique needs, because we are all different, and we don't want to lose that, because that's what's so good about us.
It's a brilliant way to educate, isn't it? Like from that early age on, to maybe think differently. If you look at traditional ways of building in Ireland, it's block built or it's timber frame, whereas at a young age they're out in the burn, they're learning, is there a different way?
Yeah, well, you know, we're learning by looking forward and looking at all the new technology and new materials that we've got available to us, but also looking backwards at how did we used to build? Because that stone cottage has been there for 300 years. They did something right? They did something really right when they were building that house. And that was using something that was locally available, naturally resilient to the weather, right? And easily repairable, because they did it themselves. So anytime anything went wrong with that house, they were able to fix it. And if you take those three things and then apply all this new stuff we've got, like breathable membranes and heat pumps and all these other aspects, and combine that stuff together, we start getting houses that are resilient because of the materials that we're using, but repairable because we're more involved in this process of being a part of it.
Just on that, David, though, someone's going to be listening at home worrying, not worrying, but thinking about their own BER rating and how they could make their own house more efficient. What kind of advice or what would you be telling them to look out for?
Yeah, so like Harrison makes a really good point. There's so much bespoke needs of every house. So, every house essentially is different. So it really depends on the nature of the house they're in. But what we see as common opportunities, and the SEI are all over this in terms of trying to incentivize the grants for attic insulation or wall insulation, is that, you have to go with the fabric, as it's called, of the house first and try and make sure that the envelope, as we call it, is well insulated and well sealed and airtight. Now, what often gets overlooked in that process, and you've alluded to it there, of humidity in the house and the ventilation system maybe not being up to scratch. It's not a case of stuffing a load of socks in the vents and closing it up and thinking, right. So you have to.
That does work though.
Yeah, but not for ventilation. It might keep the heat in, but the moist heat you don't want, obviously. So really, it's a fabric first approach that we need to take to the buildings, and that is insulation. That is the external components for the house. But again, depending on the house, there's huge opportunities if the house is reasonably well insulated already for solar. And we know that the government are really trying to incentivize that, and they've made their changes recently on the VAT requirements. Heat pumps is obviously the big technology that has a big drive behind it, because it allows us to electrify the house. And I suppose in a very simple term, the reason the government wants to electrify the house, and I teach this to students in UCD, is you think, well, hold on, electricity is one of the biggest users of our carbon emissions at the moment. Production of electricity is. But the future is we can create that electricity in a sustainable manner using wind, using hydro, etc., using solar. So that's why the EU legislation is framed around electrifying the homes. So once we have a reasonable level of insulation, then we can look to electrify the system with, say, the likes of a heat pump. But it's really important that the fabric and kind of the envelope of the house is to a reasonable standard before you look to do that, because then you'll be over-consuming electricity to keep the house warm.
And of course, you want the professionals, Harrison, doing the right jobs, but there's an awful lot of people now that their knowledge is greater at the moment. DIYers that are, they're using different platforms, they're getting upskilled, and people are better at, looking after their own needs around their house nowadays.
Yeah, look, I think people have the potential to be better at looking after their own houses. And I think, again, it comes back to education. I think the worst thing we can do is underestimate how much people want their homes to be better, how much they care, and their ability to learn and do this work and do things that are going to get there. And I agree, you need the professionals to do the parts that need to be done a certain way for safety reasons and insurance reasons and everything. But there are parts of the program of renovating the houses, which there's no reason that we couldn't actually combine with the grant a short education piece. Here's a 1 hour workshop on how to insulate your attic. And here's your grant to go and pay for the insulation. And then here's someone who's going to come and sign it off when you're done, and just make sure you did it the right way. And that process, it's more complicated, but that's a process of empowering people and educating people, and not making people rely on government grants and other people to do everything for them.
It's a great way to do it, though, isn't it, when you think of it like that? Because then you have a vested interest in what's actually in your attic.
Absolutely. And no one is going to insulate your house better than you.
Yeah.
You're the one who knows that corner is always cold. I know that corner is always cold. No one else is going to be able to do that.
It's a great idea. You get that constant feedback. And I know you say it's more complicated. It might not be, because there is obviously a process you have to go through to avail of, say, an insulation grant right now. You have to get the SEI approved contractor. There's potentially an inspection after the fact, and you have to go through the paperwork and pay for it and then claim it back after. But it's a really, really cool idea of, can you empower the individuals who kind of have that ability or desire to do it, and then to test it and verify it after the fact.
Harrison, you're probably finding those people are coming to you all the time. What's the greatest area people at the moment that people want to upskill or get better in, or improve on, when it comes to DIY or retrofitting their own place?
So we run a huge variety of courses, but the two that are consistently sold out is the How to Build Your Own Home, Build School, we call it, which is the fundamentals of construction. And most people who come to that are not, it's only a 5-day course, and it's half theory, half practical. And they're not leaving, most people are not leaving and going and building their own house afterwards. Most people are leaving with enough information and knowledge and vocabulary to be able to talk to their builders, to talk to their architects, to go to the builders providers and not feel like they can't ask a question because they're going to be embarrassed when they get there, or they're gonna ask the wrong thing and then walk out or whatever it is. That's really what that course is about. It's about confidence building, that I might not know everything I need to know right now, but I can learn it, because over 5 days, I've learned enough to actually go and start a project. And then the other one that we do, which we've just launched this year, which is already sold out the first 3 weekends that we've put it on, is a simple DIY repair course. How to fix PVC waste pipes under a sink, how to tile your own splashback, how to fix your kitchen when it breaks, simple things like concealed hinges in doors and that kind of thing. Basically, we went through the list of what are the most common tiny things that break in a house, and let's just do a weekend course that's about fixing those things. And that before we ever ran it, that one sold out 3 weekends worth of courses.
You might consider how to paint a kitchen table. That might take about 6 months, that course. I have a pupil for you ready to go.
Ready to go.
Yeah, for painting your table, yeah.
But Harrison, it brings us back to the initial point, sustainability. Whereas before we might have looked to pull something out or get rid of it. Whereas if we can repair and look after stuff, we used to do an awful lot of training out in Poland, and what we noticed was all the equipment was the exact same for the last 30 years, but it was all just done up. They just keep evolving and just fixing stuff, as opposed to the idea of get something new.
Yeah And I think, look, that's the real sales pitch for a lot of people, is that sustainability is not just about it being for the planet, even though that's important and we all like to think that's our main motivator. Often it's the cheaper option as well. Fixing something is often a cheaper way of looking after something, and making things that can be fixed is a very important part of that process. If we're not making things that can be repaired or fixed, or if we're not using materials that can be sanded back and repaired or whatever, then we're actually, again, removing that ability of repair and fixing from the culture. And was such a big part of the Irish culture, especially, fixing and mending, whether it's clothes or your houses or your tools, your carts or whatever you're working on, it's like ingrained in how people work here. And we actually run a festival in Ennistimon every year called Rekindle, which is all about sharing skills intergenerationally. It's about bringing all the older people together to teach anyone who comes to this festival their skills, whether it's horseshoe making or weaving or basket making or whatever it is. And people love it. They get so much out of coming and learning these things that they can do themselves and take back to their home.
Willie Daly there for the matchmaking as well, then.
Always, that's a lost skill for sure.
Absolutely.
Matchmaking.
It's a great opportunity, though, the DIY side of, even from our world with retrofit, there are definitely things like the obvious one is draft stripping, where you can, try and complete your own kind of air tightness of the house in a cost-effective manner. Obviously, the light bulbs and things like that. Attic, of the significant measures, attic is probably the obvious one where there is an opportunity. But even the build school side of the business that you're talking about there, Harrison, is really interesting, because what we very, very much like you described there is giving the clients or customers of yours the tool set to be able to have an informed conversation with the qualified trade. And that's very much one of the things that we want to try and do for the retrofit side, is we give people, people might be able to see on our platform, there's a couple of options for the wall installation. They maybe could do an internal wall installation or an external. And the contractor might come along and just sell the internal wall installation, for example. And it empowers then the homeowner to maybe say, well, what about external? Like, what would be the benefits for me? Maybe I won't lose the space in the house. That kind of thing is to try and enable and arm them with some of the information that they might need to know about their house in order to have that informed, kind of transparent conversation, I guess.
That's so important, David, though, isn't it? When you think of it, having an informed conversation, and Harrison, you touched on it, the confidence to have that conversation as a result of maybe, growing your own in terms of common knowledge. It's just important to be able to sit with your builder and kind of go, hey, hold on, I was doing this and now I don't understand, or I'm getting a bit lost in the build.
Yeah, and I think there's a fear maybe that we have that if we give homeowners too much information or power around this stuff, then they're going to start asking us to do ridiculous things, or we're going to be building things we don't want. But what we've really found is that teaching people how hard building is actually just helping them have more respect for the people who are coming and doing the work, and vice versa, making sure that builders understand that, like, they care because it's their home and they have a really vested interest in this. And this, the more we understand about each other's worlds, the more we're able to empathize with okay, my builder's telling me I shouldn't do this because it's going to cost more money, and I can trust them because I actually understand why it's going to cost more money when they break it down for me. And there's a respect that has to get built between both sides of that relationship. And too many people have a almost fearful relationship of engaging a tradesperson or something when they go into a project, because they don't know enough to be confident that their interests are being looked after. And that's a sorry state to be in. It doesn't need to be like that. We're all here trying to help each other. We're here creating jobs for people. We're here doing work, creating houses for people. Everyone's heading in the same direction, but for some reason we're kind of butting heads around it.
He brought me back into our dressing room. We had a brilliant coach, Anthony Foley, but he brought in a policy of there was no such thing as a stupid question. It was okay to ask maybe the question that you would be a little bit embarrassed about. And of course, it takes a while to get going, but all of a sudden, maybe performance went through the roof because all those fears about saying something that you would normally be worried about, they go when someone feels like they're free and they can challenge.
Absolutely. And that's just about creating a safe space that people can ask questions and they're not expected to know the answer. And that's really important. And I think that's the change that we can see happening in our stores, in our builders providers as well, where and we're doing it, and Chadwick's is doing it, where they've got these representatives who can help people through these processes. But across the country, in every hardware store, that our job should really be to create a space that's safe for people to not know. Even as a builder of 17 years, sometimes I don't know. And I go in and I say, what is that material? I've never seen that before. What's going on? How am I meant to use it? How do I install this new thing? And unless you feel like you can ask those kinds of questions, we're not going to. And then we're going to make mistakes when we try to do the work.
Yeah. And anybody who doesn't come to you is starting to. I saw your TV program, one in particular, the lady in Cork who's building the house, but she didn't weather it in time, and the weather absolutely turned on her. And it was lashings rain down an OSB board, and her heart would bleed for the woman. Like, in relation to that, like, what sort of tips would you give someone who's listening to the show, but it's not going to come down to you for the 5 days because Donegal will take the whole season up? What sort of tip would you give people then starting to think about renovating?
Yeah, so I think making a plan from beginning to end on the steps. I think trying to put a timeline on that plan is a really hard thing to do if you're coming at it from a DIY or a non-experienced point of view. Even when you're managing private trades, it is very hard to manage that many people's schedules. And so safeguarding yourself at every step. And Esther, who you're talking about down in Cork, her pitfall there was that she was waiting on these roofing screws, and she didn't want to waste any money on other screws or doing something else before they got there. And so we just kept waiting, and we kept waiting for them to arrive and kept waiting. And it was the wrong decision. It was the wrong move to wait so long for it. And the weather turned and everything went sour. And so I think it's all just about planning, trying to foresee the things that are going wrong. And when you don't have any experience, you have to ask someone else that. You have to ask someone who's built their own house before, or your builder who's working for you. What am I missing here? What's going to go wrong here that I'm not expecting? And try and be ready for those. It doesn't have to be a terrible part of your life, managing the building of your home. It's something you're probably only going to do once in your life. It might be the biggest investment you ever make, and it should be fun. It should be good, and it's going to be hard sometimes, but it's good. Like, playing rugby isn't always easy, right? Sometimes it's terrible, and sometimes they're bad days, and then but it's worth it. In the long run, it's worth it, because the sense of accomplishment, a self-satisfaction you get out of doing something like that and managing something is incalculable. It's not really worth a certain amount of money.
In relation to the platform then, the software, obviously things are moving on, and AI, Elon Musk, all that kind of stuff. Where's the next generation, or where do you see the next generation of your sector, say?
Well, the opportunity is in the full energy spectrum, I would say. So what we've obviously focused in on initially is the residential building and the kind of the home. There's a big opportunity to try and bring the analytics into the commercial building space as well, the non-domestic space. But likewise, even with the home, it's how can we help empower people to understand the benefits and trade-off of moving to an EV and bring it in and a charging point as part of the home. There's an awful lot of innovative technology that's being developed globally with the utility providers in particular around how can the consumer be fed more information about their usage habits, and how can they learn or actually have their hand held for them by the utility providers around their usage. So smart meters is one, but how you actually use the data that's captured from a smart meter in order to manage your energy outgoing in a more efficient manner. I think that's a real opportunity for the area that we're in. We're part of a piece with a couple of global utility entities called the Free Electrons Program. And what we've seen from some of those international utility providers is a real move to trying to use insights from customer behavior to feed back to the customer. And very much, one school of thought would say it's cutting your nose off to spite your face, where the energy provider says, you need to move to this plan. You're going to spend less money with us, but it's much better in the long run. Obviously, it's a positive from a retention perspective for them. But the fact that they're actually proactively looking at that now is very encouraging. And I would see that as probably one of the biggest, like from our own perspective, diversifying outside of just the primary home, but from a more kind of global standpoint, how can we bring analytics then to the utility, the energy consumption as a whole, let's say.
And Harrison, same question. Do you really, I don't know if we're going to end up building more homes, but where do you see the next kind of generation for you and your process, and what's that look like?
Well, I think from our point of view, the dream is to make ourselves redundant, that we start sharing knowledge across the country in a much more open way, in a much easier way, and that we feel good about going to someone asking for help, or that when we tell someone, I'm actually going to build my own house, they don't laugh at us. And I think to get to that point, from a kind of countrywide point of view, there is a culture that needs to change about what we think is a proper house, what we think a house looks like, or a house is made of, or the right materials to use. And we need to be really open to the materials that are getting used all over the world that are doing great jobs. Even the new passive houses or the timber frame houses that are going up now, there's a resistance to that. There's a resistance to new technology here that we've got to, and that we're only going to kind of overcome with education, and we're showing people how it works, and we're teaching people why those things are good. Not just telling them you should use this material, but say you should use this material because it works in this way. And it's like the thing you used to use, right? It does the same job, but it's better for the planet.
The resistance point is a really good one. It just sprung to mind as you were saying that, Harrison. Like the obvious one in our space on the retrofit side is, and it's such an Irish thing as well, is the fireplace. And having a fire, sitting around the fire, watching the Late Late or whatever it is.
Or watching Donncha.
Yeah, watching Donncha.
Those days are gone.
But obviously, naturally, you're letting the heat straight out of the house. So obviously, you're heating the house and it's going straight up the chimney. But it is a very Irish thing, and it's education of, can we educate the country about, yes, it's a lovely thing to sit around the fire, but maybe it's almost as good to sit around a stove, and that's not letting the heat out. And okay, it's not as efficient as just closing up the fireplace as a whole and heating your house with something like a heat pump. But it is a step forward, and it's, that education, realization, and try and break through some resistance that you might have.
And I think there's another piece to that as well with the older structures, the old stone ruins that are across the country. We've got these grants available now, these vacant property and derelict property grants that are available. And it would be heartbreaking for me or for Ireland to see those grants result in people knocking down all the stone buildings that are literally like Ireland's history and heritage of construction, how buildings were built here and how lives were lived before we had all the new adaptations we've got now. And we've got access to materials that are suitable for those buildings. We've made our mistakes. We went and plastered every stone building in the country, and we realized that cement plaster over a stone building isn't a great idea. And we've got access to all the new materials that we need to. We've got cork, and we've got lime, and we've got hemp, and we've got all these materials that are code compliant. They've all been certified. They all work. And we, again, just need to educate people on, these are the materials to use with this kind of house in your unique setting. And it's different from your neighbor. And everyone needs to understand that houses, while they're all different, they all need different materials and different solutions to the problems that they're facing.
Yeah, because it adds to the legacy, but also the uniqueness of your house and your personality.
Yeah. I mean, for me, my house is very much, I see it as a collaboration between me and those builders from 100 years ago, because they did most of the work. I'm just upkeeping it. I'm just keeping it going. And that's why I love my home. It's not because it's the nicest house I've ever built. I've built much nicer houses for people, but it's mine, and I've got a story with it, and it's where my daughter grows up, and I'm connected to it for that reason.
Yeah.
And I want to see that house there for another 100 years.
Brilliant. We mentioned the stigma probably around education. Is there any other barriers? You're at the front line of it. Do you see when you're chatting to people out there, what are they finding as barriers towards sustainability going forward?
Yeah, I think, if you look at the house and trying to make your own house more sustainable, definitely the education, as we talked about supply. But I think cost is a clear one, right? So there's a lot of work going on at the EU level of we've got to identify how can we upgrade the housing stock across the EU. And cost is an obvious, because it's an upfront cost, essentially, if you want to take that journey. It's how can we align with innovative solutions from the banking sector, the financing sector, maybe the utilities sector. There's a lot of talk about on-cost billing, where you can try and finance the work through keeping your energy bill the same, but even though your energy costs are reducing, they'll help finance some of the work for you. There's innovative solutions we need to take in terms of cost, for sure. And I think as the global nations become more in tune with, we've got to try and make the planet more sustainable. That's where it's coming. It is taking time, though, and it's very slow to hit the ground, I guess, because you've got these commercial entities that are required to enable that, and they've got their business goals they've got to hit. You've got various competing factors that come into that. But I would see, probably certainly in the area that we're honed into, Donncha, I would say financing is probably the next biggest.
For you, Harrison, is there anything you're seeing?
Yeah, I think for me it's an education piece as well, but it's understanding the process from start to finish. People are wondering whether this is something they should engage in. Should I think about these grants that are available? Should I be doing up my house? And it's programs like yours that are giving people the information and giving them all the steps to the end goal of their house being finished that are so valuable. And the fact that it's pretty much open source means that without any investment, people can keep doing that investigative work. They can keep finding out if this is the right thing for them, all the way down to, here's a contractor who lives 30 kilometers away from you that might be able to do this work for you. They don't have to use that contractor. There's no obligation to them to do it, but they've really been given all the information we could possibly give them for them to make an educated decision about, okay, this is something I want to be a part of, I want to avail of, I want to use these grants, and this is a way that I could do it.
You can keep going then. It's just like, being harsh, but it's nearly spoon feeding just to get to the next hurdle.
It is, yeah, but that's important, and it's important to not just show them the end goal, but to show everyone every step to get there.
Break it down.
It takes 1,000 steps to get up a mountain. You don't do it in one leap, and you need to go on every single step. You can't skip any. And so to be able to see them all before you take them is really empowering for people. It gives them so much information to be able to make those calls.
So Pat, I might even come to you on this. What products and initiatives have Chadwick's brought in terms of directly affecting the supplier to provide solutions?
I suppose looking recently, we've introduced an eco centre into each of the branches, which it promotes sustainability within the home or the commercial property, and it kind of showcases the products that we brought in, because people talk about sustainability and sustainable products. It's not really one product that's sustainable. It's a system that we sell. So if you're looking at a self-build or retrofit, it starts with the kind of the insulation. So we'd have the inside insulation, we have external insulation, a biomat system for external insulation, which is a very good alternative to having to bring a plaster into the home and having to rip the walls out. The external insulation, if you can get that in your house, it's a huge efficient way to do it, to insulate your building. And it's also clean and tidy and allows you to change the face of the business. And then it also goes back into the whole, we mentioned the heat pump piece. There's huge developments along that side. And I think David mentioned it, the one big thing that people have kind of forgot about, ventilation is a huge, very, very important part of the envelope of a home now. We have it recently, in the past number of years, insulated our homes within an inch of their lives without really putting the ventilation piece in it. So there is a huge scope, I think, around that ventilation part. It's more than just, as you said, it's a one-off. It's your one time you're going to build it and make a huge investment in it. There's so much product out there now that can make your home so much more efficient. It's evolving all the time. Dave will know when you look at the BUR piece. The industry is involved because we're being forced in it. As much as we want to do it, we actually are being forced into doing it as well. Suppliers are bringing new products onto the market all the time. Not necessarily the right products at the right time, but eventually they will be, coming down. So yeah.
In terms of for companies like Chadwicks, what other future promotions or energy efficient constructions could they look at? Could they help out the whole industry in terms of evolving and moving forward to be more sustainable?
And from a Chadwicks perspective, I jump in first to say, look, we're trying to bring products onto the market all the time that are going to help with sustainability and home efficiency. The lads can speak for themselves, but that's where kind of the introductory. So the customer comes in the door and asks us, comes in with the plan, whatever, asks us, what products do you have? The Eco Centre plays a massive part in that then. So instead of the consumer kind of guessing what we're talking about, we can actually bring them along and show them the journey from the foundation to the chimney pot effectively, and on the retrofit and how that works. So that's where we fit into that piece. We're bringing new products and sustainable products to the marketplace.
And from your lads, again, on the front line of it there, what would you see that companies could be doing better?
Yeah, I think if you look at Chadwicks and the reach of Chadwicks across the country with the store presence and just their presence in that market as a whole on new build, on retrofit, is if you take something like attic insulation, being able to provide the suite of products, and that's one thing that we're going to look to be able to include in YourRetrofit.ie, is you can choose based on your budget what you want to do, but you could also choose what's the most sustainable product that I could look at. So in attic insulation, we know there's different forms of attic insulation. We've talked a little bit around the kind of different types of wool that you might use, and they come at a cost. If you want to be more sustainable, it might be more costly. But if you look at what Chadwicks can do, providing that set in the first instance is a great initiative, because it gives the opportunity for the customer who does want to be sustainable to choose the most sustainable option. I guess it's a business decision. You've got to charge your margins on your products, but anything you can do to try and incentivize the customer to consider that most sustainable product. I think the attic insulation is a great example, because there are so many different ways and materials that you can use to insulate it. Giving the homeowner, empowering them to make the decision to choose the most sustainable one is a great route to doing that.
For you, Harrison?
Look, I think all builders providers are in a tricky position where the landscape was always that we were providing for construction companies and builders who really knew their stuff.
Yeah.
And I think the housing landscape in Ireland right now is that builders don't all look the same anymore, right? Builders can look like anything. And I think there could be some like education for our staff and for the people working in builders providers all over the country around helping people on that journey, knowing that every single person that's coming in is a builder just by the fact that they're walking through the door. They're there looking to build their own house. And then vice versa, we can start that education piece in the other way and getting people the information that they need to be able to communicate better with their builders providers. And it's a really tricky thing. And I think as the landscape evolves, we've got to evolve along with it. And we've all got to keep working together to make sure that people are getting connected with the products and with the people and the information that they need to make their homes what they need them to be.
Yeah. Such an interesting conversation. David and Harrison, thank you so much. Where can people find you? I know there'll be people listening kind of going, how can I find out a little bit more about the two of you? So David, I might go to you first. Where's the best place to land for you?
Yeah, very simply, we're on www.YourRetrofit.ie, and there you can see all the options around getting the advice, the tailor-made advice, working with your budget or working with what kind of level of progression you want to make in your BER, and we connect you with that ecosystem. As I said, like Chadwicks, one of our headline partners, and you can book your appointment in store with them to get your in-person consultation on your house. And I suppose the other thing I probably haven't mentioned at all is it's totally free to use. Our software is totally free to use for the public, and the consultation process is free within Chadwicks as well.
Brilliant. So. And for you, Harrison?
I guess people can find out more about what I'm talking about in a book that I wrote called Build Your Own. So you can find that anywhere in any bookstore or on my website, which is harrisongardner.net, and about the courses that we run. If anyone wants to come and upskill themselves and educate themselves a bit around construction or DIY and repair, at ourcommonknowledge.org is the website for that.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us on Under Construction. A brilliant conversation, and we're so grateful to the two of you for joining us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
The Under Construction podcast is produced by the Podcast Studios for Chadwicks, Ireland's leading building merchant company, where you can choose from the best products and expert advice to get the job done. Drop into any of your local Chadwicks stores nationwide or visit us online at chadwicks.ie.